Hello and welcome back to Mandibil, and I thought I might just do another Stefan Molyneux video here. And the reason is not that I want to spam you with Stefan Molyneux per se at this point in time, but as I saw, he had a new live show running yesterday, and it was like, push in your questions and, I'll get to them, right? So I was the first guy writing in the text box in the live stream text, and I asked about Hume. That was just what came to my mind, right? So let me see if I can, no, he will read it out loud, so you can take it from there, right? I don't need to recount it. So I'm basically asking about Hume's is-ought gap, and that's the classical, skeptical David Hume, who slaps some good, observations in your face and some hoops you have to jump through in order to justify whatever bullshit you want to come up with as a moral statement of some kind, right? Okay, I listened. I didn't watch it live. I was watching it like half an hour late in the stream. So I was the stream wasn't finished, but the part I had asked questions about, I had other things to do than sit and wait for him to answer my questions, right? So I jumped in and found out that he had begun answering this question. And so I'll just comment on it because I sat through it, right? It took him, I'm a qualified guess, about 40 minutes to come up with sort of a kind of an answer, because he kept repeating the answer. So where is the ought, or something like that? And he kept saying, where is the ought? Well, basically it isn't there. There is no ought, right? So I forgot to do something, which was bring up the quote. Hume is ought problem. Let's just take good old Hume. Here we have the quote. Maybe I should just move my pretty face a little to the right here. Do it live. So you can read it, right? So this is the famous quote by David Hume. This guy, he wrote in a book in 1739, 1740. His book was a treatise on philosophy, basically, right? Which is also its name, A Treatise of Human Nature. So what Hume does, contrary to most other philosophers, is actually taking his own experience as the starting point of your philosophy. That's how you do it, in my opinion. Starting to throw fancy terms around is not going to do anything. I'm not going to respect your philosophy, right? So if you're not starting by describing how you experience and what you experience and how you categorize that and how you choose to understand it and so on, all your justifications or your definitions and so on, that follows from that, because from what else could it follow from, right? So he's describing more or less philosophy from his own standpoint, you could say, right? Of course, he mentions John Locke and whatever, right? So he's not completely rigid, and that could be my major criticism of David Hume. He doesn't go all the way, right? But nonetheless, this is a central quote in the history of philosophizing and presenting philosophy. People who have presented their philosophy, this quote might turn out to be probably the most important quote ever in the history of philosophy. And I'm going to tell you why. It's important because it addresses one of the, if not the final step people take in their philosophy. Some people jump right in and start moralizing without even justifying it by having done any ethics or adhering to any particular moral principle or arguing for why they, other than, well, mommy told me and there's a God and things like that. That's not going to crack it for me, at least, right? Which is also a point that Hume kind of makes in his quote here. It sits at the furthest end of your philosophy just before you start to order people around from your so-called fancy ethics, right? Or your ethics that might be sort of fancy. It has to be, you have to violate things in order to justify bossing other people around. And Hume has seen the problem with crystal clear eyes here, right? So, as far as I can see in philosophy, there are two major hurdles. There is the inside-outside dichotomy. Talking about an external world is hugely problematic because if you say there's something outside your experiences, how do you justify that? I'm not saying there isn't. A lack of evidence is not evidence of a lack, or, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence and all that, right? Which is also something we might get into later. But at both ends of the string of fundamental philosophy all the way to a moral principle, at each end sits basically the biggest questions you have to grapple with or wrestle with if you want to do good philosophy. And if you think it's impossible to do this, you might want to try my philosophy, which is a series I made where I present my philosophy, how I approach it, how I approach my life, using the manual quote I call my philosophy, because a philosophy is completely personal, in my opinion. Philosophy is not raising a finger and standing on the mountain, bossing people around like Jesus or whatever, right? It's personal. A philosophy is my thinking about my thinking, right? You could even say, if you really want, that philosophy is a circular argument. Maybe it is. But then, well, you're wasting your time over here, right? Maybe it's just a linguistic turn, right? So the limits shouldn't be thrown off the course by a limited tool called language, right? Okay, so at the start, there's the problem of the inside-outside dichotomy, which is grappling with the understanding of an external world and where the hell that came from and how you approach it. Then there's Hume's is-ought gap. And in my opinion, the whole thing that Hume is getting at here, which I don't think he realized completely how deep this goes, right? That it doesn't matter how much thinking you do about your thinking, it will never crystallize into you being sort of all of a sudden justified in bossing other people around. There is no logic that follows. That's what he's seeing. You can't get from a point, I have done some thinking, to now I'm going to boss you around. It will never follow. It doesn't follow. So whatever you come up with is personal. Philosophy will always and forever be personal. It will deal with what am I going to do using my philosophy. That will always be the case. But what it's usually used for is bossing somebody else around. It's just a big smokescreen of fancy words in order to make you believe that these people are justified in bossing you around. And it doesn't really matter if they're right or wrong, if you believe them, right? If you take their authority for granted. Just be careful, because in my opinion, it doesn't follow, right? I mean, look at the logic of it. I have done some thinking. Now I can boss you around. It never follows. It can't possibly fucking follow. I'm going to, take a Hume 2.0 here, right? Like, I take it all the way. He is very skeptical, and he doesn't say, for instance, you can't get an ought from an is. That's a misquoting. That's a twisted representation of what Hume does here, right? So you might read. I have quoted the quote. I have read the quote many times, right? But when you get to the point of when you try to condense what he's actually trying to say, he's begging you to present a justification for how you can go from describing things or argue for some kind of existence to all of a sudden, therefore you should or shouldn't. That leap is invalid in his justification, but he doesn't say, so therefore you can't do it. What he says is, you need to present some kind of, a justification for this. You need to bridge this from the is to the ought all of a sudden. You need to bridge it. A reason has to be given, as if I'm not misquoting him, a reason should be given for what is altogether inconceivable to him, right? It's like if I just talk to Hume in the 1740, right? And I said to him, I think you can fly from Scotland to New York, right? And he would say, I don't, right? And he would say, yeah, I think you can actually fly. You can create a machine and then fly to New York. He would probably be a skeptic, right? But he has seen birds and so on. Birds can apparently fly across the Atlantic, right? So he might say, well, I'm not ruling it out, but to me it's inconceivable how you could do it. That's the kind of approach he takes to this, right? So, because nobody has flown philosophically across this gap, right? He's just asking, would you mind give me a good logical structure for what? Yeah, and maybe he does it in this. He presents it in a way where he pretends that it's okay to ask for a justification. But people trying to give that justification will just illuminate you how bad this argument is, right? So in this way, he's clever, right? Okay. Let's get back to Molly, and let's see what he does with my question.
So anyway, I would like to get your questions. Richard, I would love to chat with you again. Give me just a minute or two on. I never get to the text questions, which is kind of rude. So I'm sorry about that. I do want to get to the text questions. Feel free to throw them in. Good evening, everybody. So one person asks, how do you bridge Hume's is?
You might want to mention my name, right? One person is just one of these one of the slaves, right?
Ought gap. Hume said that to him it was inconceivable how you could possibly argue logically from what you experience to how you think that experience ought to be. So I, of course, have an entire History of Philosophers series available to donors. I think it's 23 or 24 major.
So now he is, fair enough, he's trying to sell his philosophy show, right? I kind of do the same when I refer back to my philosophy, though I try to make it in a context here, right? But what he does here is kind of, well, this is one of these ignoramuses. I have to tell him, I did a show where I mentioned Hume, so you might just want to go there, you little helpless person, right? Because I'm a bigger smart, and you probably have no fucking clue what Hume was saying, right? You just read somewhere and heard that you can't get an ought from an is, and so I just have to lecture you, right? You cannot possibly be anywhere close to my level, let alone be smarter than me. I have a free domain cap, right? Look at me. It's a fucking ugly cap. Okay, whatever.
Philosophers.
What is it about this Illuminati pyramid? Is he a part of the Illuminati or what? It looks... it just reeks of Illuminati to me, right? Nobody in the right mind would use a pyramid if they are anti-Illuminati. Whatever.
Up to, but not including, Immanuel Kant. Couldn't quite get to Kant.
Why do you talk so weirdly? Why don't you take my question seriously? It's like you don't... I said, but that's a question. Okay, let me do question. Right?
Quite get to couldn't. And one of them, of course, is Hume. And you should check this out for donors if you subscribe at freedomain.com/donate. Then you get all of these tasty shows.
I'm not interested in tasty shows. I'm interested in good philosophy, right? Okay, and I mind you might want to, scan one of my QR codes here, depending on your preferred currency. The Buy Me a Coffee is the top one, which is a donation website. And if you are into cryptocurrencies, you can donate Bitcoin and Dogecoin via these QR codes. And if you want to use Patreon, or there's a link in the bio. If you want to use PayPal, you should be able to get an email address through my bio, right? And if you want other cryptocurrencies, let me know, right? Thank you for donations. I appreciate it very much. Thank you very much.
Oh, not to forget, Sunday morning, 11 a.m. It is, I like to branch out a little bit, burst into song from time to time. I'm working on some cat's eye dances. And
yeah, because that's just what I'm waiting for, right? Because this Hume question is just, I'm talking about dancing and singing now. Because that question is just kind of boring, right? I have answered this question so many times,
Also, makeup tutorials, apparently they're quite a thing. Making bird hands in sunglasses in cars with way too much makeup, complaining about men, number one. Number two, makeup tutorials are quite the thing. The last makeup tutorial that we did...
Because that's just what I want to hear about now, right? Yeah, let me hear about your makeup tutorials with your, I think it's your daughter, right? Where you look like a fucking, made up pig, right? Excuse my bluntness, but come on, man, right? What kind of simp are you? Looking like a fucking clown online, live? What are you doing, man? You look like a fucking idiot. Simping to these fantastic women. I'm not bashing the women in your so-called family, but you submitting yourself to makeup, it just says a lot about your simpy mentality, right? Women are perfect. Oh my God. And in the beginning of his UPB book, I'm reminded that he says something, and I'm paraphrasing. This is dedicated to my wife, who does everything right and knows everything that is true. Give me a fucking break, man. Just because she let your wiener inside her crotch or crack doesn't mean all of a sudden she's the center of the philosophical universe, right?
Where I ended up with a second head on my head was very popular. And so by popular demand, by request, we are now having what will be truly a revelatory...
This is an insult, right? To someone who's trying, and he can see from my question that I'm not an idiot, because I can phrase the question without implying that I am actually believing in this. He should be seeing that this is actually a guy who can think. With the way I phrase it, I say, this is what Hume thinks. I'm implying that I'm not saying that this is what I think. So he can see my sort of gentle phrasing of the question, or he should be able to. And he should take it seriously, right? He just said he should be more serious about listener questions in the chat. And now he's talking about fucking makeup, right? It's a fucking insult, right? It's an insult. It's a narcissistic fucking insult, right?
Exegesis of the makeup tutorial phenomenon. My daughter will be joining us this Sunday morning. And we will be doing makeup. And what that means...
Yeah, because that's what everybody wants to see you having put on makeup. Let me put on makeup. Yeah, it is the Muppet Show, right? He is a fucking Muppet puppet, right?
Means is she's ordered a bunch of stuff.
Oh my God, how interesting. Let's put Hume on the back burner now, because we have to hear about how interesting it is that my daughter, she ordered some stuff. How interesting. Fuck Hume, right?
She's ordered a bunch of stuff. And I will confess to being minorly alarmed, which is probably an underreaction. But she has ordered a bunch of stuff, which she would...
And what about this domain logo here? It has these olive branches. That's also kind of Illuminati, isn't it? Sort of Freemason shit. There's a pyramid and the sun and symmetry and these olive branches around his free domain logo down here. It just smells like Illuminati to me, right? Is that because is that why he began all this ditching anarcho-capitalism and went into politics, or all of a sudden has this ambivalent Christianity thing going? I don't know. It's just weird, right? It's fucking ugly logos, man. It's like you know, from something from the 18th century or something like that, right?
Be applying to me, I think in layers, I think including sandblasters and rollerblades. She will be applying that. It could be a...
Okay, yeah, enough of the dad jokes, right? But how about coming to the important thing here, right?
Bugsy Malone spaghetti cannon or pie cannon. It could be something like that. I assume I will be fairly unrecognizable at the end of it, which means there's a possibility I may be returning to my youth. This Sunday morning at 11 a.m.
So he doesn't have much self-respect when he comes around, right? He doesn't have much self-respect. He does actually the 666, thing there. Right? Maybe it's just his mannerisms, but it's kind of the 666 he does there. Whatever. You are letting somebody paint you in the face like a clown to get views. You're subordinating yourself because you're a fucking bitch without a backbone, right? You have to apply yourself to the matriarchy. Otherwise, mommy might destroy the family and run away and take all your Bitcoin, right?
I hope you will come by. She is very funny, and it's going to be most enjoyable. And also, I get to do her makeup. And I've warned her ahead of time that I will not try to make her look bad.
I thought that you had some pretty, let's say, from a feminist point of view, pretty harsh ideas about makeup and women, and they should be very discreet about makeup. All of a sudden, because daughter interested in makeup and attracting boys, all of a sudden you have to be painted up with makeup. All of a sudden it's very interesting. So you didn't have this sort of success in implanting a discrete idea in your daughter. Now she's apparently buying, makeup left and right and wants you to be painted like a pig. What's the matter with you, man? Don't you have any self-respect? Don't you have any rigidity in your principles or what? What's going on with that, with you, man?
I have a little bit of makeup experience because, of course, I was in the theater world, so you have to do your own makeup when you're an amateur. And
I think you're still in the theater world.
So the only thing that may go wrong on Sunday morning, other than me falling in love with my own visage, with all of the various accoutrements that have been ordered for me.
Oh, it's also this. It might be funny in the beginning. His sarcastic distance to things here, right? He's never. What's the upright? What's it called? I want to say honest, but that's not exactly what I mean. But come across as if this is serious. He has this sarcastic distance to things when it might be funny in the beginning, but it starts to become kind of annoying. If first of all that, and I have to do a little thing. Sorry about that. I shut off some noise for your sake. It's like it starts to become a nuisance that he has this sarcastic distance. It's an implicit throwing shit in your face. He reads that question and he can, if he has any brain that works, he should obviously be able to see that this guy asking a serious question where he leaves it open for him to interpret what Hume says without inflicting any particular understanding of what Hume said. Now, another thing that you might take into account is that this guy most memorably, you might recollect most clearly when he had that famous or semi-famous debate with rationality rules back some 5 years ago or something like that, about his so-called UPB, where he basically said, I'm not going to, after, lecture him about good starting point, about philosophy and debates and so on, said, well, I'm not going to discuss UPB with you, right? Because I don't have whatever quote or whatever it was. So, and rationality rules, he was lectured about how he should bring the quote of the philosopher and the exact description in a book somewhere, and so in order to discuss a topic. But now I present some philosophers. I'm not presenting my own philosophy here, but I'm presenting some other philosopher. But that shouldn't take away that he should draw up the quote and say, okay, when you look at the quote by Hume, he says this, he says that, and says the other, and I think it means this. So from my point of view, I would understand the quote as this, and so on. In a rigid philosophical discourse of some kind, at least reference the quote, right? But what does he do? He talks about doing makeup show with his daughter, because that's just what the listeners want to hear about, right? This is just a funny gag show, right? He's just doing this in order to kill some time until he's get back and count his Bitcoin, right?
Is that I'm going to overcorrect. You know, when you do these things, you have to do this on a bike, you wobble, you overcorrect, and you end up crashing. So I'm going to try and do her makeup well, but I'm probably going to overcorrect. And, a little too much here. I'll add a little bit more here. I'll balance it over here. And then she'll end up buried under an asteroid's worth of Maybelline products. So we'll see. But that's generally...
Yeah, that's just fun now, yeah. But I remember back in the day when he was, heavy going on Twitter and whatever, it was also about women should be discreet with makeup and so on, and red lips, and what was it? They were, illustrating their horniness. I'm paraphrasing, right? Generally, I'm paraphrasing. If I'm not quoting directly, just take for granted that I'm paraphrasing.
The goal. All right. Enough dodging the challenging question.
So it's a challenging question. Is that just something he says, or is it actually challenging? So you should pull yourselves together and maybe bring up the quote, right?
How do you bridge the is-ought dichotomy?
Well, is that what I asked?
So, the is-ought dichotomy is the difference between if Bob pushes Jane off a cliff, she's going to fall, right? She can't.
No, it isn't. No, it's describing the existence of something, right? If you read the quote, let's take the quote for old time's sake, right? And it's from Book 3, Part 1, Section 1, in his book, A Treatise of Human Nature, from 1739 to 40, right? It was published in two or three portions, right? In every system of morality which I have hitherto met with, I've always remarked that the author proceeds for some time in the ordinary way of reasoning, establishing the being of a God, or makes observation about human affairs. You could say that human affairs is actions. So I'll grant him that, right? When of a sudden, I'm surprised to find that instead of the usual copulation of proposition is and is not, which is another way of saying the sort of a 1740s lingo here, right? That is and is not is that this exists and this doesn't exist, or this is the case and this is not the case, right? I meet with no proposition that is not connected with an ought, or in another way, there's only all of a sudden propositions that is connected with an ought. And mind you, the term connected with an ought or ought not, he's basically saying the term ought is not important here. If I said should, that doesn't mean it changes the argument. It's every term that is somehow connected with what he calls an ought, right? Which is another way of saying moralizing maybe in a more modern fashion, right? So it's connected with an ought or an ought not, you should or shouldn't, right? So it's this jump from describing what is and what goes on to all of a sudden bossing people around, right? This rear jump, all of a sudden, because I experienced this, now I can boss you around. It doesn't follow. But if you read it further down, right? For as this ought or ought not expresses some new relation or affirmation, this, as if they argue as if there's some connection between these two kinds of statements. A reason should be given for what seems altogether inconceivable. How this new relation can be deduced from something else entirely, right? That is entirely different from it. Yeah. You're describing something, and then all of a sudden you start to boss people around. That doesn't follow. Why are you creating this presumed argument that is invalid? But the point is that this is not a rare occurrence, this kind of observation here. It happens all the time, right? And Hume proceeds down here by saying, but as authors do not commonly use this precaution. No, they don't. I shall presume to recommend it to the readers, and am persuaded also that this small attention should subvert all the vulgar systems of morality. And let us see that the distinction of vice and virtue is not founded merely on relations of objects, nor is perceived by reason. So, you can't... perceived by reason is sort of more a gray area, right? He doesn't think that you can reason your way to a moral principle. I disagree with that. And because it's a different approach, right? Now, he might have another understanding about what is perceived by reason, because in modern language, that's not the best way of describing it, in my personal opinion. Perceived by reason is, he is contradicting, perception is not reason, in my opinion. So, it's a choice of words here, and there might be some understandings that have gone on the wayside since 1740 that I'm not aware of, right? The use of philosophical language or construction of philosophical sentences might have changed a bit since then. So I'll leave it at that, right? But what he says is, in any case, that unless you give me a very good point to a good gap or a good bridge over that gap, I'm not going to accept that you can just jump from existence to bossing me around, to having an experience and then bossing that experience around. It doesn't follow. Just like that. You have to give me a good bridge between these two. And people have struggled with this ever since. And the reason why they have struggled is because you can't do it, in my opinion. It's kind of obvious. But the ramification of this is so huge that people just kind of throw up the towel in there and say, well, I don't give a fuck about Hume. Fuck Hume, right? I can't argue my way over this gap because there is no argument. So people are just sort of, well, it's been 300 years, so we have more modern approaches, right? And God and whatever, right? And one of the reasons why Stefan Molyneux might have been warming up to the idea of religion is that it helps him circumvent David Hume's is-ought gap, right?
Can't do that Flintstones air pedal, so she's gonna fall.
Okay, so if somebody pushes somebody else falling over a cliff, okay, so this is just an event, right? It's just an event. It's a description of some objects moving or whatever it is, right? How does it follow some kind of ought or ought not about this? I'm not saying you can't ultimately get to an ought or an ought not. Personally, I don't think you can, because it never follows from a direct description that you can start to boss whatever is descriptions around. What I just said about Hume's is, but there might be other ways to get to some kind of moralization or some kind of principle where that kind of deals with this kind of situation. But just observing things and then starting to boss people around, that's not going to work.
And if she falls far enough, she's going to die. Hit her head on a rock and bleed out, or skull crush or something like that, right? So the is Bob pushes Jane off a cliff. The is that Jane falls. The is that Jane gets injured. The is...
Yeah, it's more like, just to be precise, what Hume calls human affairs, I would say, right? But, it's a very generalized statement. I'll give him that in Hume. But I think what he's trying to say, that what a human experiences and what humans do when you observe that, right? The observing of things existing and humans behaving. And all of a sudden, you start to boss people around. And he calls that ought or ought not, right? Or connections with ought or ought not. So the connection is important because there are all sorts of moral terms used. Good and evil and right and wrong and should or shouldn't, ought or ought not, and ought or oughtn't, and so on, right? So he says it's all connected with an ought in order to say all these moral terms, however they might be phrased, I'm just calling them connected with an ought or ought not.
Is that Jane dies. Now, we are horrified by this and we consider this murder and so on.
Why is it always the man doing the so-called supposedly wrong thing? Why is it not a woman pushing a man through a divorce court, for instance? Why do we never take that example, right?
And Bob should be punished and castigated as a murderer and judged to...
Should be punished? Oh my God, there was the ought right out of the gate, right? Should be this and should be that. You just said, you just used the term should here. Should be punished, right? You just violated Hume here. Should is connected with an ought. It's a similar kind of term. It's a moralizing term. Bob should be punished. Where the hell did that come from? When, as Hume says, all of a sudden, Stefan Molyneux start to boss people around. Ought or ought not, should or should not, right? You don't even understand the significance of what Hume was doing, you fucking moron, man, right?
To be an evil guy and,
So now he's also evil. It's like, I am bossing people around and labeling them this, that, and the other. I'm not saying they're not immoral. I'm not saying they're not supposedly potentially evil. But you can't just throw these terms around just like confetti, right? Without any justification. He's not saying you can't get an ought from an is. He's saying you have to justify it. You have to justify it. He's interested in how you get from A to B, not what the content of B is. He doesn't care about your moralization. He's interested in how the hell did you get there? So you just circumvented that is-ought gap that Hume is pointing out by saying he should be this and he should be that.
It's even put to death, certainly put in prison. And so...
Yes, should be put to death. Oh my fucking God, man, right? He's just illuminating you on what exactly Hume was pointing at. And he is not even aware of what he's saying, right? Because he has no fucking clue what Hume was saying. He's completely ignorant of the significance of what Hume is doing, and he shows us clearly that he doesn't understand shit about what Hume was trying to say. Hume was pretty clever when he did this. He didn't say you can't get an ought from an is. When you read the quote I just mentioned, or I showed you, he doesn't say you can't get an ought from an is. He explicitly says you should give an explanation, right? He leaves it open for you to give the explanation, but he does imply at least that if you don't come up with this explanation, it will probably subvert this bullshit ethics that this guy or girl is trying to cough up, right?
The is the matter and energy. A certain amount of potential energy turns into kinetic energy, turns into...
I don't experience energy. I don't experience matter, right? Energy and matter is not a part of my foundational parts of my ontology. I might have some abstractions I call energy and matter, but I don't have any foundational aspects of my ontology. I have more foundational aspects I'm working from in my ontology than matter and energy. But the midwit he is, he understands that people, because it's an abstraction, matter and energy are abstractions, you're all of a sudden lost to, I can't experience this, so I have to take for granted that these fancy people talking about these particular things know what they're talking about. So he's sort of numbing people by using these abstractions called matter and energy, right? All of a sudden you have a hard time arguing against them. Or at least that's what you feel, possibly, right? That's also why it's crucially important to have a very, very solid ontology, which is sort of a foundation for your philosophy, right?
Jane, tumbling down the cliff, bumping her head, bleeding out. That's the is. But we say to Bob, you ought not do that. And
who are those we, right? What if that Jane, was it Jane, the name? Tarzan and Jane. Do you know everything possible? Because you can always create a theoretical scenario where this woman is sort of perfectly innocent, right? And the absence of evidence of anything to the contrary must mean that she's innocent. Well, this is bullshit. It's the trolley problem thing where you are presented with this, we know everything about the world, now make a decision, right? And he's presenting this innocent woman and this guilty man, sort of, right? Scenario. How do you know that she's not somebody who has just tortured 15 children to death, right? And this guy has 3 children, and 3 of these children has been tortured to death by this woman. How do you know that's not the case? Yeah, because you made the example. Yeah, but then it's not adhering to real life, how real life works, because you don't have this as a bystander. You don't have that kind of information. You're just flying off the handle and pulling out your guns in order to shoot Bob, right? Maybe this woman wants you to shoot Bob, and she's created a scenario where you, as a bystander, a third party, a third person in this, thinks that she's innocent, but she has just tortured 15 children to death. And she wants you to shoot that guy who has found out, right? So you're just a stupid idiot pulling out a gun. And because you're suffering from this is-ought problem thing, you do not have rigid thinking.
Hume's question, which is a reasonable question, is to say...
Well, is it now? Is it a question? I don't think what he says is not a question. You just saw the quote. I don't think it's a question. Only to the extent that he says that you should give an explanation for how you could just like he just did, pointing out that all of a sudden this ought or ought not appears out of nowhere. Hume doesn't say you can't get there, but he just said you have to give an explanation. Stefan Molyneux just did it without any explanation. He just proved Hume's point, right? He just illuminated what Hume was talking about, and he's not even aware that he does it, right? That's how stupid this man is.
Where's the ought? Where, in the atom, void, and energy of the collection of atoms we call Bob, pushing the collection of atoms we call Jane.
No, but you could make but atoms is a theory, right? It's a model for the micro workings of what is going on. Nobody can experience atoms, right? It's impossible. It's a theory. It's fine. I'm not bashing the theory, but you can't use it in a philosophical argument, right? Because you are saying that because there's a theory of matter and energy, and there's no ought in Einstein's E equals mc squared, right? You could make a theory that there is some ought flowing, there's some ought particles, right? And when I get the notion ought, these ought particles are condensing in my mind and creating the ought. You could make that theory. That's actually a scientific approach to it. Can you disprove that? It's as easy to disprove as dark matter is, right? Or as difficult, right? You could make that scientific approach, but you don't do that. And it's against this. The absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence, right?
Off a cliff to the point where Jane becomes a collection of slightly less earth. She's an inert collection of atoms. Where is the ought? If I steal something of yours...
No. You can use the term steal. Because now, if you haven't created an explanation for what it means to steal, steal is an immoral... steal is another term, is a combined term that says immoral way of acquiring stuff. That's stealing. So saying you're stealing is you're bringing in, I should say, the morality or the ethics through the back door using a term, right? I'm not accepting that. Don't sneak in morality out of the blue, right?
Then the matter and energy of your possessions or possession has transferred to my vicinity, right? Clump of atoms used to be over there. Clump of atoms is now over here. I grab your phone. Yeah, run. Grab your phone and run. Why don't I wait till it's on the map application? So
No, but then you say you're implying in the morality. When you say your phone, there's some moral content in that, in my opinion, right? It's like it's all embedded in the language, and this is why you should be careful with when you philosophize. He does anything but this. He constantly drowns you in language without any clear definition or structure or base or rigidity. Philosophy is not about spewing words. It's more like a personal, well-structured, rigid scaffold to work from. And then you should be careful with your terms, because you shouldn't bring in meanings that might implant itself in the one who's listening to you that is not in concordance with what you're trying to do. Unless, of course, if you're a sophist, you want to bring in these hidden meanings or sneak them in through the back door this way.
I don't have to enter any stupid parse codes. Parse codes? When you parse things out, parse codes. Parse codes. So, I mean, I know I went to boarding school. We're just practicing the luge, sir, but nonetheless, I should not pronounce it in such a anti-colonist kind of way. So where is the ought? You ought not steal. You ought not murder.
So who has invented this ought? Who invented the oughts? Where the hell does it come from? Maybe it's a Frankenmonster. Maybe it's stupid. It's because people they need to be able to boss people around. Not least parents. They need to have a justification why they can boss their children around. Maybe that's where it comes from, right? That's why Christianity came like, an orange in your turban. It's like, holy shit, this is good, right? Otherwise you will not go to heaven if you don't do what mommy and daddy says, right? It's bullshit, but it works.
Where is the ought? Now, religion, of course, solves this by saying the ought is God.
Yeah. Shove your fucking religion up your ass, right? And this is also, it's an insult to David Hume, who was obviously well known for not being religious, right? And he clearly mentioned this here, the author proceeds for some time in the ordinary way of reasoning and establishes the being of a God, or makes conversation. So now he invokes Christianity here, right? I mean, give me a fucking break. You're a fucking insult to philosophy, to good philosophy. It's like, he's basically, in my opinion, saying, I have no fucking clue what I'm doing, right? I want to make it sound like I know what I'm doing. But I'm going to appeal to the Christians. At least I have this backup plan B where I can go and say, yeah, Christians have the answer, right? Because some guys, 2, 3, 4,000 years were eating some moldy breads and some weird plants and had some visions, and they wrote it down, right? Therefore, there is an answer. Bullshit, man.
God commands. God is the all-knowing. God is the all-good. God created the entire universe with the ought. And so, in a way, if you say a wild animal roaming free is not in a cage, but if you create a zoo and you put animals in a zoo, the ought is, well, it's a zoo. That's kind of what it's for. It's there to copulate in front of embarrassed school children and creep up to toddlers behind glass. And
no, but a zoo is a way of human beings to arrange a scenario where they can get something that they probably don't deserve, which is getting close to a lion. Right? Curiosity. You shouldn't get close to a lion, right? If you let the lion be a lion, you would avoid the lion. But by restricting its scope or its area of roaming, you know what I mean, right? You can get close to the lion or the tiger and see what it looks like and what its mannerisms and so on, right? But actually, you could argue that you don't deserve that. You are inhibiting the lion's natural habitat in order to get close to it, right? and it starts to become crazy, and these cat creatures start to walk back and forth until they're brain dead, right?
Remind us just how vulnerable they would have been in the past. So where's the ought? Where is the ought?
What is it? So, would you mind taking my question seriously rather than, right? Hume doesn't say there is an ought somewhere. Have you read the quote, you fucking moron, man, right? Read the fucking quote. Read it. It's here. Where does it say you have to get an ought? It doesn't say. If anything, it says, I don't think you can get an ought, right? That's a bit of an overinterpretation. But if you read between the lines, I suppose it reveals what most people think that he says, that you can't get an ought from an is. Strictly speaking, he doesn't say that. But he does imply that if you want to use an ought, you need to justify it. You can't just throw them out after having done some kind of observation and then throw in a few oughts after that. That's not going to fly. That's fucking stupid philosophy, right?
And of course, Hume came up around shortly after the sort of rise of the scientific method. And the scientific method is that there is no ought.
So you're lecturing me about Hume rather than dealing with the question? You're just pussyfooting around because you don't have a fucking clear understanding of this. You don't have an understanding of Hume and his quote. You don't have a rigid answer to the question. Are you trying to brainstorm while you are rambling how to approach this? Because you have a sense that this guy who's asked this question actually have an idea what this is about. So you're trying to mind numb me and the listeners to this into a situation where you can then sit for 40 minutes and talk about the scientific method, Tarzan and Jane, and moralizing, violating Hume's is-ought gap in the business, and talking about makeup with your daughter, so until maybe some 40 minutes down the road, you're going to say, okay, and this is the answer. And then you're hiding the answer in a 40-minute rambling nature of a speech, right? So you might camouflage this way that you don't have any kind of rigid answer to this, or at least express that you have an understanding of what Hume is trying to say, trying to get to grips with what he's saying, rather than just regurgitating this you can't get an ought from an is, which is a misconception of what Hume is saying.
What in the universe there is only the is. Because prior to the rise of the scientific method, the universe was an ought. There is special providence in the fall of a sparrow. I mean, I remember I was going to ask a girl out once when I was young and superstitious.
Oh, come on, man. Get to the fucking point.
A huge tree branch fell not too far from us. Now, of course, a lot of people would say, that's a sign. That's a sign. I remember also once I was going to get into a relationship that I really probably shouldn't have. And the girl and I was sitting in a...
Is it a sign if that tree branch falls in the forest and there's nobody to see it? Is it still a sign?
Hot tub. Many moons ago. We're sitting in a hot tub and making foolish goo-goo eyes at each other. And, I guess it's somewhat of a romantic environment-ish. Anyway, and I shouldn't have got into the relationship. It was a bad idea, nonetheless. I mean, we wouldn't need philosophy if all we ever made were good decisions, right? We wouldn't need nutrition if we only ever...
So there is again. So if you only have good and bad decisions here, he's implying, right? So where did that also all of a sudden come from, right? Yeah, you could say, well, I have done so many, I've written books about it and whatever. But you're dealing with this question as if it's unsettled now. You have to explain it, right? So you can't bring in preconceived ideas of good and bad, or is an ought, ought not, and right and wrong and all that, because that's the question at hand. So we have to wind back to a place before that in order to justify a discourse on what Hume is saying concerning is's and oughts.
Anyway, so we were in this hot tub, and then in a hotel, and a bunch of loud, tattooed, tubby guys came and sat. Hey, how you guys doing? Sup? And they were drinking, and it was just like the universe sent the fat, tattooed, beer belly guys to break up a romantic drift that would have.
Oh, it was a sign that I shouldn't be with this woman. Yeah. So this is typical. This is typical. Somebody who tries to be a rigid philosopher, but runs into problems. He wants to go somewhere where he can't go using his so-called philosophy. And out of desperation, he turns to mysticism, right? This is probably something that is more common than you might think. One of the best examples might be Plato, right? It's the... I can't argue well for this ought thing. And I think in the end, this is where it parks. The problem with the is ought is so huge that people are willing to grasp or grab whatever they can in a desperate attempt to circumvent Hume. They'll grab whatever they want. It's a sign from the angels and whatever fucking shit, right? Or I saw the ass of a dog that looks like Jesus and you know, whatever the fuck, right? So mysticism is a sign that I should this and I should that, right?
Had me spinning wheels and spitting blood for a moon or 5. So before, everything was a sign. Everything was a sign. The universe is giving you a sign. If you got sick, it was because...
Did you fuck her, didn't you, right? Let's get some details, right? Did you... was it in the back door or Nutella or ketchup, right?
It's a sin. If your house caught fire, it's because you did something wrong. If something good happened to you...
But it's because you did... You're doing it again, man. You can't just sit there, this is wrong. Yeah, in your abstract, simplified representation of reality, this might work. But when you're out in reality, it doesn't work because there's so many things that you haven't a perfect understanding of a situation in this way. So that enables you to go and boss people around. You don't know their incentives. You don't know what is going to happen next. You don't know if they're making a movie. You basically don't know shit. Shut the fuck up with your oughts and your shoulds and so on. Fuck off you, man, right?
If your illness...
It's almost like the defending yourself with a gun. If somebody starts saying should and ought and so, shoot them. Right? I'm not saying, but it's just like these do-gooders who think that they have perfect understanding of the world and starting to boss people around. That's the scourge of humanity. It's the is's and it's the ought men, the ought women, the should women, the good and evil, the right and wrong persons. Those who are judging humanity, right? Fuck you, man, and your is and your oughts, right?
This was cured, it was because you prayed well. So everything in the universe was an ought because everything is designed.
Are you lecturing me? Or are you just in a convoluted way say you have no fucking clue about this, right?
Right. Like in animation, everything that's on the screen, like if you just film a movie, there's stuff in the background or whatever, right? But in animation, everything that's on the screen is there by purpose and by design. Nothing's there accidental. You don't just point a camera and get animation. Animation.
Of course you can. A documentary. What the hell are you talking about, stupid idiot, man?
Everything's purposefully put there. The universe was entirely...
Okay, so let's take that example. Everything is for purpose. Okay, so if you take the movie The Shining, which I've made a massively detailed 25-part analysis of, because I love that movie so much, and I think it deserves this kind of analysis, right? But 25 hours of analysis is a lot. I'll give you that. Nonetheless, in a famous scene where Wendy comes up to Jack, which is played by Jack Nicholson, who sits at the typewriter for the first time typing away because he's got this new idea about a book. And she comes in and asks a question, do you want a sandwich? Something like that. And he freaks out, right? And when you see the head on, you see Jack, right? In the background, there is some chair and a table. And then we see Wendy, and back to Jack, and back to Wendy, and back to Jack. And at some point, behind Jack, this chair is no longer there. And then we see Wendy again, and Jack and Wendy, and then we get back to Jack, and then the chair and the table is all of a sudden back again. What is going on there? Did you ever spot that if you have watched The Shining? So, and I might remind you that there are tons of these kinds of continuity errors, right? All through the movie, from the beginning almost until the end. They are everywhere, these continuity errors. And it's in my opinion, one of the ways that Kubrick says this is all a first-person imagination, right? So you might want to go and check out my analysis of The Shining. There are continuity errors everywhere. It's not the first time anybody has spotted these kinds of continuity errors, but the number of them that I have found is next level compared to what other people have spotted, right? They are basically everywhere almost all the time, right?
Ought. And it was trying to puzzle people out. People were trying to puzzle.
No, but maybe he should ask the question. Why do I think there should be an ought? Oh, maybe that's a better. Why am I hooked on the idea that I should be able to derive an ought? Is it because I have argued that there must be an ought somewhere? What is the meta-philosophy I have done in order to justify the whole idea of an ought? Or I should, but something connected with an ought, as Hume phrased it, right? What justifies the idea of an ought? How about doing some philosophy concerning that, Mr. Philosopher, right?
Now, what does this ought mean?
Yeah.
A crow landed on the windowsill and stared at me beadily. That's an omen.
Come on. No. I'm not interested in mysticism. I'm interested in rigid philosophy here.
Happen. Oh, look, Robert Plant is singing at a concert. Singer for Led Zeppelin, and a white dove has landed on his hand. Of course, in the past, people, that's an approval of God, has sent down his messengers, and everything was an ought. And science come along and says, okay, let's say, just for the sake of argument, that God isn't arranging everything like a dream at night that has meaning, that is trying to tell you something, or trying to teach you something, or trying to instruct you, or morally improve you, or punish you. Maybe you're not in a story. Maybe you're not in a novel. Maybe you're not in a cartoon. Maybe you're just an is. You're just a bunch of atoms and cells and clumps and blah, 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 right? So that's the question, right? That's the question. Where's the ought? If the universe is matter, energy, and void, and it's mostly...
How many times has he said, where is the ought, right? And he keeps saying this, where is the ought? Right? It's like he's building tension, right? He's the master of suspense.
void. Like matter is hydrogen the way that living things are beetles. I don't know much about God, but I do know that he seems to be inordinately fond of beetles because they're just so... Many of them, or I guess we're down to two now.
Oh, that was a little joke there. The Beatles. Harrison and Lennon are dead.
If the universe is matter, energy, and void. And it is an accidental clump of gathered together matter with no hand guiding it, no story behind it, no purpose in front of it. Where do we get the ought? Of course, the ought is avoid hell, get into heaven, stay in the good graces of God, save your soul, avoid the devil, resist temptation. Those are all the oughts set up by God, who created and designed and runs a morality play called...
Yeah, but all this talk about religion is basically saying, he's seriously struggling with this ought problem, right? So he has to use plan B, which is psychologically appealing to there must be some science somewhere. God must be, presenting some odds for me. It's this backing off into mysticism to avoid the realization that there is no ought anywhere. You can't get to a fucking ought this way, at least, right? You can't observe things and then get to an ought. But he might also, if he was a little brighter than he is, he might say, but who says that just because Hume pointed out that you can't get an ought this way, can't you get ought another way? It's sort of maybe it serves as a kind of I'm not sure if you would call it a red herring, but it serves as if it's the only way, because it's such a humongously common way that people misuse the idea of ethics and morality, that people think this is the only way you can do it. I have done it a different way. My approach doesn't require a bridge over the ought, or the is-ought gap, right? There are other ways to do it. There's at least one other way to approach it, right? But because your approach to philosophy is, I need to get to a point where I can boss people around. You have to get to jump the is-ought gap, because you need to boss people around. Hume is just saying you can't do that. You can't just argue this way. You can't experience something and then start to point fingers and boss people around. Because first of all, you don't have all that insight that you claim you have in your abstract philosophizing. When you're in the reality and seeing shit going on, all that you don't have access to should all of a sudden or then be taken into account and saying, I don't have all the information, so I'm not messing with anybody here, right? I'm not pointing fingers. I'm not shouting any order or ought not or should or shouldn't, right? Because I never have sufficient judgment to do that on behalf of somebody else. But his whole worldview falls to pieces, because all he's endeavoring to do, using UPB for instance, is I need to get to a point where I can boss people around.
Old, get to heaven, stay out of hell, resist temptation, avoid the devil. You're running obstacle race of your body trying to trip you up. Jesus trying to save you, the devil trying to take you down, angels, demons, one shoulder, the other, which way you turn your head is which way your soul goes forever.
Maybe you should be a priest rather than a philosopher, right? It sounds like you're in the right spot being a priest rather than a philosopher is a fucked up priest, right? Like any other priest. They're philosophically fucked up.
What if it's all just matter?
But you just said that it was matter and energy. You just said so. Now you're sort of implying a contradiction here.
Wait. Energy. Accident.
My God, he looked lost there.
Accident.
Sorry, he looks pretty lost. Oh my God. This is not a picture of somebody who feels confidence that he can explain something about the is-ought gap, right?
Where's the ought? Where's the ought?
Is there something, I'm just reminded that when people, when you are in a dialogue with some person, right? And they are trying to think about what to say. And there's something about if you look down to the left and to the right, or you look up to the left or to the right, about the sincerity of what you're doing. I think correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the worst one is looking down and to the left, which is where you look in order to come up with some bullshit to fend off criticism, right?
In a game of chess. Where are the rules? Oh, well, they're on the paper. Okay, so somebody written down, just a bunch of atoms.
No. The rules is an agreement, right? Is if we're going to play this game, I am adhering to these rules, and you will. If you don't adhere to these rules, I'm not going to play anymore. So we are playing as long as you and I adhere to the rules. If you stop adhering to those rules, which are described in the rules, yeah, but that's an agreement, right? But you have to make that agreement then. You have to make the agreement. Do you have an agreement with Tarzan and Jane, or Bob and Jane, or whatever they were called, right? If you had an agreement, this is a completely different scenario. So in chess, you have the agreement, which is the chess rules. But you could make up your own local rules, and you could say that you can jump, all pieces can move however they want. Probably a weird chess game. But as long as you agree on it, I'm not going to mess with you, right? But if Jane and Bob has an agreement, why are you meddling with their agreement without even confirming or conferring with them about their agreements? What are you actually doing? Maybe you're an idiot. Fuck off, you, man. You're looking at those two people playing chess and saying, you shouldn't move that way because I have an ought. I have an ought. You shouldn't move that piece that way. None of your business, mate.
It's the ought. It's not like gravity, right? You throw something up and down, that's gravity. There's no rules.
No, that's not gravity. That's a thing moving up or down. Gravity is an abstract idea with a description of what is going on. A theorizing called gravity. Gravity is not what you experience. You be careful what you're doing, because you're not experiencing gravity. You are experiencing something moving and throwing. You could say throwing is also an abstraction. Hand moving, object moving the other way, and then sort of things like that, right? That's not gravity. Gravity is the description from, maybe you could say, a scientific description of what is going on. That is gravity. You're not experiencing gravity. You have to be precise, and you're not. You're an idiot.
Morality, where's the ought? And
this is the 13th time he asked the question, where's the ought, right? He's creating suspense, right?
People peeling themselves away from the idea that the universe was a morality play entirely set up to shepherd you to heaven and keep you away from hell, and that birds that flew over, clouds that flew by, the rain, the sun, the heat, the cold, the illness, the wellness, the babies, the not babies, all of these are signs sent by Almighty God to guide you to the good and away from the evil.
So he's basically, in my opinion, my personal opinion, he's implying that the ought he is getting is some kind of mysticism. He's tapping into some kind of mystic intuition of some kind. I'm not sure what to call it, but let's just call it a mystic intuition. He has some kind of, because he desperately want to avoid and saying, it's just my subjective feeling. I have some feelings when I see this, and therefore you shouldn't do it because I don't like to have this feeling, and I have this feeling because it's supposed to be understood as an ought, and I'm inflicting my ought on you because I have my personal feeling about this particular kind of event, right? So he's appealing to some externalization, and the externalization of a feeling is kind of mysticism. Maybe that's how you could define it. So he wants to circumvent this whole Hume's is-ought gap problem by appealing somewhat to this mysticism, right?
But science was saying there is no ought that comes from
I've never heard scientists say that, right? If you're a good scientist, you should also adhere to the idea just because there's an absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, right?
consciousness. There is only the is of matter and energy. And we can say void, but void is not really an is, it's an...
But matter and energy is not something that is. These are scientific abstractions that are used in order to calculate shit. You don't experience matter. You don't experience energy. You experience objects and their colors and sounds and taste and touch and so on, and how they behave. This moved this way relative to this thing. That's an experience, right? And you could even maybe argue that you're not actually experiencing movement. You are experience compositions. And because you have a memory of how it used to look and it's different now, you call it movement or behavior or whatever term you want to use, right? But you only ever have that experience right now. Everything else at most is a memory, right? And not an experience. A memory of an experience is not an experience. Just like a photograph of the moon is not the moon, right?
Absence of it is. So Hume said, where in the chess pieces are embedded the rules of chess? Well, nowhere. A train follows a train.
That's not strictly correct. He's kind of strawmanning Hume here, right? He's not asking where is the ought. He's saying you need to argue for that jump, right? He's not saying there isn't an ought or where the hell is the ought. The ought is something that people produce. They're saying you should do this and you should do that. There are lots of oughts, yeah, but they're just verbal manifestations of some kind. Or maybe a gun, right? An opinion with a gun is an ought. Hume doesn't ask where is the ought. It's a misrepresentation again, right?
Correct, right? Chess, you can't move there. You can, right? That's the problem. So, but you got to do that funky little L, right? That funky little dog leg with the knight. Well, you got to go, right? 2 forward, 1 left, 2 forward, 1 right. No, you don't. You can move it, you can throw it, you can eat it, you can slap it under your armpit and do an Irish jig. You can do anything you want with it. It's in the mind, it's in the convention, it's in the agreed upon, but there's no ought from the is. So tell me if, I don't want to over-explain, but I obviously want to straw man. I don't want to straw man. I want to steel man the argument.
No, but you just strawmanned it basically, and you have been kind of strawmanning it all the way now, right? And while shoving in all sorts of other shit that has no concern with this kind of question, right? That I presented. So, I mean, maybe it's a Freudian slip that he says that he doesn't want to strawman, or he wants to strawman, right? So now he wants to steel man. What the hell? I'm asking about Hume. I'm not presenting any arguments. I am wanting him to reflect about Hume's statement. He doesn't do that. He doesn't follow his own restrictions about how you should approach good philosophy, which is bringing up the quote from the book, as he said to rationality rules, and basically killed a potentially interesting discussion about his UPB book because it's such a fucking stupid, shitty book and so absolutely atrociously argued with these 5 so-called proofs. Apparently he wants to avoid any discussion about UPB. You should just eat it because it's his, right? So, yeah, let's hear it.
Which is to have you understand the challenge of the is-ought dichotomy.
What? Is he lecturing me? I have to hear this again.
So tell me if, I don't want to over-explain, but I obviously want a straw man. Sorry, I don't want a straw man. I want to steel man the argument, which is to have you understand the challenge of the is-ought dichotomy.
Okay, so now you're going to lecture me. Is that what you're saying? You're lecturing me on your steel manning, so you're trying to re-represent it as if I'm trying to tell you something. No. I'm talking about Hume. You should then steelman Hume at least, right? Not me. I'm just guiding you towards Hume and saying, hey, look at Hume's quote. Well, how do you approach this quote? Bring up the fucking quote. Deal with the quote. Make a whole video about where you decipher his quote and how to understand it.
Thank you for the tip. I appreciate that. You can tip, of course.
That tip wasn't me.
freedomain.locals.com. And so, let me know. Have I got it right? Have I got it right? Is that a fair representation of the is-ought dichotomy?
So, no, it's not a fair, and I have just presented why it's not fair, right? That's why I'm making this criticism, because it's, okay, give me a fucking break. Is it a fair representation? Why don't you bring up the quote? Why do you need to make a representation of it? Bring up the fucking quote. Why don't you, right?
As far as you see. Okay, yeah, I'll just make a message here.
So you spent kind of 20 minutes or 15 minutes trying to represent it, right? I mean, you might bring up the actual quote and talk about the actual quote. Maybe Hume fucked something up. Who knows? You might have spotted something that I haven't spotted. But why don't we discuss Hume's quote, which is basically what I'm pointing to, right? I'm implying that you should look at the actual quote and try to understand it.
And maybe he's here, maybe he's not, but I want to make sure that before I reply to it, I want to make sure that people understand that I understand the is-ought dichotomy.
Well, you don't. You absolutely fucking don't. You just violated it, trying to represent it. That's so fucking stupid, it's unbelievable, right? You are implying that you have no fucking clue what you're talking about. Absolutely none, right? But what you do know is that you need to boss people around using your whatever shitty UPB system, and you need that ought. You need to moralize, otherwise you don't have a business, right? So you're trying to sort of, how can I circumvent this? And yeah, now I spent 15 minutes trying to represent some idea of what I have of what Hume was saying, which is you can't get an ought from an is, which is a misrepresentation. You basically have no fucking clue what he was writing, right?
All right. Looks like we are relatively okay. Nobody's saying it's not. Okay. So how do you bridge Hume's is-ought gap?
Okay, so let's just cut it out short here, right? He has trying to tell us that Hume is saying you can't get an ought from an is. That is incorrect. All Hume is asking, you have to justify that bridge, that jump. If you're saying you're starting out by describing something, and then all of a sudden start to boss people around, just like Stefan Molyneux did with that cliff example, right? And we are saying you ought not do this and he should be punished and all that, right? That is what Hume is pointing out you can't do without justification. He just did that which Hume said is problematic. Just starting to throw oughts around out of the blue. He just did it, trying to frame what Hume is saying. That's the level of stupidity we're dealing with here, right? But if he goes into chapter 2 now, where he's trying to say, how can you bridge that ought? That's, okay, interesting. If you can bridge it, I would like to hear it, right?
How can you logically argue from what you experience to how you think that experience ought to be?
Yeah, he's like, he can't find anything to attack me. The way I phrased the question, he can't attack me because I am so smart that I can ask the question and only appeal to what Hume is saying. And I'm phrasing it in a way where I imply that this is a subjective view, right? How can you get from your experience a justification for how that experience ought to be? He can't get around this. I'm implying the subjectivity of it, and he can't. He's trying to circumvent it. He can't.
Madame K says, correct, who had the wildest dream. You know, I had the strangest dream.
What the
Great
fuck?
soundtrack for Brimstone and Treacle.
What? Come on, man.
So, yeah, so the way that you bridge it is, without a doubt, there is no moral rule embedded in humanity, in the cells, in the atoms, in the void, in the end.
That's what you just did. You just did that. You're not giving an answer. I'm going to give you an answer. No. I'm just going to ramble again, right? I'm going to give you an answer. No, I'm not going to give you an answer. Let me ramble again, right? You fucking idiot, man, right?
Energy. We don't blame gravity for dragging Jane down to her bloody demise if Bob pushes her off a...
We? Who are we? What does it mean to blame? Blame is that not just another rephrasing of the connected ought, the ought connection, right? The moralization that Hume is talking about. You're bringing in words. Is this lingo thing, bringing in terms with that is morally laden or morally imbued with something ought or ought not or should, or good and evil? These words that have this imbued underlying moralization, just bringing in the term, that is easy. Words are cheap, you know, right? But going out in reality and doing it is a completely different thing.
Cliff. We don't blame the cliff. We don't blame the air for not providing enough resistance. We don't blame...
There's a blaming. He's bringing in his sophist terms, right? Hume is not talking about blame. Not literally, at least, right?
The clouds for not reaching down and cushioning her fall. We don't blame gravity. We don't blame the rock she falls on. We blame Bob for pushing Jane off a cliff, right? We blame him for that. We say, you shouldn't have done that. If somebody steals from you...
So you can find an example. If it's Adolf Hitler, right? Somebody in 1944 pushes Hitler off a cliff. So that's immoral or what? No, but it's all circumstantial, right? If that woman has tortured 15 children to death, including 3 of Bob's children, is it okay? So yeah, it's this. If you have the perfect understanding of the world and the situation, and you just pop by that cliff and say, hey, this is imperfect, you ought not be, you don't have the understanding. Maybe this guy has chased this woman around for months because she killed 3 children and she's going to kill more of them and torture them to death. And so she pushes her off the cliff in order to make her stop. How do you know all this? Well, the perfect answer is you don't, and you can't, and that's why you should shut the fuck up, right? And mind your own business.
You say you ought not have stolen. Now, Hume would say, well, so the property, right? I don't know, a pair of glasses here. You steal my glasses, because whatever, right? You want to see better. So you steal my glasses, and so the atoms and energy that represent my glasses are not here, they're over there, right? The atoms have moved. And I say, you shouldn't have stolen. Okay, but where?
Oh, no, you shouldn't have stolen. No. Now you're bringing in these words, right? It's a lingo game for him. How can I lingo my way to an ought here, right? So you shouldn't have stolen, right? Of course you shouldn't have stolen, because stolen means acquiring thing in a moral way. So what he says is, to deconstruct what he's saying, it's immoral to acquire stuff in an immoral way. Of course it is. It's a tautology, basically, right? But he's not arguing. But saying it's immoral to steal sounds like he's getting somewhere. He isn't. He's just creating a tautology without explaining the immorality of it, right? Be careful with these kinds of people.
Where in the glass is the ought not? Nowhere. It's a human convention. And that seems to make it subjective. Like, I like blue and tenors.
That seems, well, how can you say anything but it's subjective? You're walking along the road and all of a sudden you see two people and apparently you know their names, right? So why do you know their names? Do you have to know their names? And they're looking over there and you see one guy pushing a woman over the cliff. And apparently you go over and you look down and there she is looking kind of dead. Maybe you go all the way down there and try to, shake some life into her, and her head has, detached the body, and you say, okay, I suppose she's dead, right? Bob, you ought not do that. All of a sudden, it appears, the ought, right? Out of nowhere. You are creating a subjective judgment. You are watching the scenario. You're experiencing colors, the sounds, and the taste. You are experiencing the objects, the persons, the cliff, the movement. You are it's all subjective. You are experiencing this. Right? How can it not be subjective? How can that ought not be some kind of subjective understanding? You brought the ought along, right? You're the one who comes there and brings yourself along and then start to boss people around based on your subjective ought. How can it not be subjective? How can it not be anything but subjective?
So, how do we solve it? And
yeah. So a philosopher who answers a question by repeating the question and repeating the question and repeating the question, and the question is basically halfway a straw man of the so-called question, right?
Yeah, you do have the best dreams. Somebody had a dream where they referred to my concubines. And of course, I'm just so dimple-cheeked, halo naive. Concubines is.
Let me talk about something else than Hume, because this is just a funny show. Hey, I need some makeup over here. I want to be a clown now. Right?
That's what you get wheat off a farmer's field in? Concubine harvester, is that right? I think that's right. Oh,
concubine. Okay.
See, nobody says
another half-ass dad joke, right? There's a screenshot for you and a half, right?
Oh, concubines. Actually has a concubine is a basic fact of nature, like gravity. So the answer is, if you say you cannot get an ought from an is, then anyone who tries to get an ought from an is incorrect, and that's your first rule. It's like saying nothing is true. Well, is that true? Yes. Well, then something is true.
Okay, so you're appealing to a paradox now, right? So if you say you ought not get an ought from an is, you are implying an ought by using an ought statement, right? So therefore you cannot moralize either, because you can't get an ought then. You shouldn't get an ought. You can't refute Hume by saying you shouldn't get an ought. If he says you ought not get an ought, if you rephrase it this sophist way, right? It's not what Hume says, but that's what he claims. So he strawmans Hume in order to refute him, right? But let's say that he has something going here. If Hume says you ought not get an ought, he is violating his own rule, right? Now, let's say that he does that. Then you can't use an ought either. You can't say to Hume, you can't use an ought because you're violating your own rule. Now, forget Hume. I'm going to use oughts over here. So he refutes Hume by using Hume. And then he says, let's forget Hume and let me make some oughts over here. Oh my God, man, right? Holy fuck. I want to rewind a bit.
Ought from an is, then anyone who tries to get an ought from an is incorrect, and that's your first rule.
That's your first. Oh my God, the finger, right? The finger. Oh my God, you little person. That's your first rule. Okay, the first rule. How many rules do we have now, right? You might have mentioned that I should be careful. It's like he's been rambling for 20 minutes, right? And then here's the first rule. Oh, okay, let's get on. It's like, oh my God, now I need to focus all of a sudden, right? Now, oh my God, now it pops out all his brilliant philosophy, right? But Hume doesn't say that you can't get an ought from an is. What he says is this, right? For as this ought or ought not expresses some new relation or affirmation, it's necessary that it should be observed. You should see what you're doing, right? You're sort of creating a structure that sounds like some kind of syllogism even, right? And then all of a sudden switch to an ought out of the blue. This new relation, it just appears out of nowhere. And it should be explained. How the hell do you do that, right? That's what Hume is saying. At the same time as a reason should be given, as he said, for what seems altogether inconceivable. How the fuck can you do this? He doesn't say that you can't do it. Read it carefully, you fucking moron, right? He says a reason should be given. He says it's very he can't see how you could do it, but he opens the door that you should present a reason how you can do this, right? So you're misrepresenting Hume in order to refute him. It's fucking pathetic, man, right?
It's like saying nothing is true. Well, is that true? Yes. Well, then something is true. So, if I...
No, but that's a stupid argument. Nothing is true. And is that a true argument? But it's a claim. But is the truth apt that kind of claim? Well, it depends on the definition of true, right? So these kinds of stupid, also this what's it called, the liar's paradox, right? This sentence is false. Well, what do you mean false? What sentence? Well, the sentence itself is sort of a meta thing going on there, right? It's these manipulative paradoxes and Zeno's paradox. It's all manipulation in order to unsettle you. So I'm not buying into these contradictory, so-called constructed paradoxes.
I say you can get an ought from an is, and Hume says, no, you can't, then...
That's incorrect. He doesn't say that. I'm just pointing it out. But you're not adhering to your own rigid supposed ideas of how to approach philosophy by bringing up the quote from the book, right? Which you should then. Should, right? Careful, Mandibil. You should because of your own standards. That's why I can say you should do it, right? You ought to do it because you said that people ought to do it. You said you ought to bring the quote. So according to your own standards, I can say to you, you ought to bring the quote from Hume. Because you said in a prior video with rationality rules that everybody ought to bring the quote. So I can say to you, because you have this ought, you have brought this ought along, for whatever reason that you might not have disclosed, that people ought to do this. So I can say to you, you ought to bring the quote up in the discussion, which you don't. And you are basically illuminating everybody that you have no fucking clue what Hume was actually saying. You're just running with the rumors about what he says.
And he's giving me an ought from an is, which is there is not an ought in the is, therefore you shouldn't say that there is. And what?
No, he doesn't say that. I mean, I don't need to repeat it, right? You understand it if you have two brain cells to rub together, that he's not saying that, Hume, right? He's misrepresenting Hume. And maybe he's misrepresenting Hume in an attempt to try to refute him by manipulating what he thinks he says, or what he wants to think he said, in order to create a straw man that he can then pull down under the pretense of have refuted Hume, right?
What that means is that concepts in the mind have to accurately represent things in the universe.
So now he's grappling with the inside-outside dichotomy. Now this is we are at the other end of things now, right? This is something you should have dealt with a long time ago, before you dealt with ethics, right? You should have settled how you approach this inside-outside dichotomy. If you have an experience of something, how do you know there's something outside that experience? And furthermore, how do you know that's what that outside is and how it's composed and how it works and how it might influence that experience you have of it? Because you can't have both of them. Because if there's something that is outside, it's not your experience then. But if it's not your experience, how the hell do you know that's an outside? Because all you have is your experiences, right? You can't have it both ways. If your experiences, it's an inside, it's not an outside. But then if it's an outside, it's not an experience then. So how do you know about it?
Concepts in the mind have to accurately represent things in the universe.
So what is the difference between mind and universe? So the universe is something you don't experience. But how can you know if it's correctly represented by your experiences if you can't experience that which is supposed to represent? So it just points out at the other end of things, you don't know what you're doing either. You have no clue about what it takes to do good philosophy. You're a fucking charlatan, right? You are completely lost in the weed here.
Now, they don't have to, like gravity. Gravity is kind of a have to, it's an absolute in the universe. So if I pick this up and I say, watch me eat this kumquat. That's such a fun word to say. And I feel it should only be said on OnlyFans. Come watch me eat this kumquat. Right? And I try and eat it. Well, I'm incorrect. This is my glass is not a kumquat. So I may see my inner life more vividly, but I will not gain any vitamin C. So if I'm going to claim that something is true, it almost sounds like a tautology, but it's not. If I'm going to claim that something is true, then it has to be true. Now, there's no is-ought in the dreams that we have. If I had a dream last night that I'm riding a flying giraffe over... I love that line from one of the last Duran Duran songs, Come Undone. Lost in a snow-filled sky. I don't know why I just love that line. Lost in a snow-filled, so vivid. It's actually a pretty good poet, the writer for them. Simon Le Bon also became a sailor. Did he become a sailor? Am I on a drug dream? Anyway, so if I'm riding a flying giraffe, lost in a snow-filled sky, I'll make it all right. There's no ought or is in the dreams. It just is. Like, ought it have been a flying hippo? No, there's no ought because it's all self-generated. But the moment you're going to try and map mental concepts,
Maybe you should just read the fucking quote, right? It's not that difficult. It's difficult because you haven't read the quote, I have to presume. You have just heard somebody say you can't get an ought from an is, and then you ran with that. And then you feel, pushed back. And how can this old dude, right, who liked fried chicken, supposedly, how can he say something like you can't get an ought from this? How dare he, right? That's skeptical. Oh my God, we hate skeptical philosophers over here. No. I am all for skepticism because it's the right approach. You have to be fucking skeptical about everything, right? And at the end of the day, you would end up with your own personal philosophy because that's where it leads, right? But it doesn't work for Stefan Molyneux, who wants to sit there on his throne and boss people around. So we have to circumvent this, and he had to misrepresent what Hume does, maybe from ignorance, which doesn't, I mean, there's no excuse. Ignorance of what people, the quote is right there. It took me 3.2 seconds to find it, right? You can slam it up on his screen there, right? Just like I do. Here it is, it's right here. This is no biggie, right? It's quite simple. For some prose that is 300 years old, this is quite straight up understandable. You don't have to be some kind of genius linguistically to understand what Hume says here. It's very, very, very simple. It's very simple. What people do is they start by describing or mentioning, establishing existence of this and that, and having observations about people doing this or that, right? And then the argument continues where they all of a sudden bring in, you should or shouldn't, or you ought or ought not, or something that is connected with an ought or ought not, which is basically saying they describe things and then all of a sudden they switch to moralizing, but out of the blue. This is an invalid structure, obviously. It doesn't take a genius to see that. But because this gap, this problem, that it's not a problem to be solved, it's just, Hume is saying, well, you might take a look at this, observe this freaky kind of argumentation structure in every moralization you see, and you will probably see that they're doing the same thing, just like Stefan Molyneux just did, right? In his example, where he just throws around this ought, and this person should be punished and whatever, right? It's just like, ought, of course, right? And it can subvert all these vulgar systems of morality, just like Stefan Molyneux's vulgar system called UPB, right? Which is so atrociously vulgar, to use Hume's term, that it boggles the mind how he can do something so atrociously bad, right? It's not difficult. It becomes difficult if you think you need to jump this kind of gap, and you misrepresent Hume, and you twist the words around and appeal to paradoxes and all sorts of shit, and all this lingo, he just sits there rambling over and over and over. It just indicates that he can't do it because you can't do it, but he doesn't understand the whole question, right? He doesn't understand what Hume is saying. He's basically completely ignorant of anything that is worth talking about here, right?
Ideas in the mind to things in reality, then they have to be accurate.
So there's mind and reality. Okay. So now we're going into some kind of metaphysics here, right? What kind of metaphysics is this? Is it materialism, or what is it, right? There is something outside his mind that he apparently has some kind of access to because he's talking about it, right? So how does it work? How did you get to the idea there's something outside your mind? What part of that experience of yours is outside? Well, it can't be, well, otherwise it's not an experience. Are there inside experiences and outside experiences? How do you create that kind of dichotomy? That sounds freakish to me, right? So explain that kind of metaphysics.
Saying that they're true, right? So I have my little lip balm here because I have lips as dry as a horrified virgin's. Where do these things come from? I don't know.
So, brilliant.
If I say this is a flashlight, it's not, right? It's not even a pretend flash.
Maybe it's a flashlight.
Flashlight that's mimicking.
For a very, very, very small penis, right? Oh, fucking God, man, right?
As you can open it up, have a look. There's my beeswax lip balm. So, if I say this is a flashlight, it is not a flashlight. So, The fact that it is a lip balm does not mean that I have to call it a lip balm.
But does it mean that it's a fact? It's a lip balm. What does that mean that it's a fact? So you're really, I mean, okay, so now we need the definitions of all this, right? But why don't you confer with Hume's quote and we deal with that quote? Understand, he's basically just pointing out an invalid logical structure in how people argue to get to boss people around using oughts, right? Or ought-connected statements. It's an invalid logical structure as some kind of syllogistical derivative they are pretending to create, right? All this bullshit here is just illuminating that he doesn't know what he's doing, right? He has no clue what he's doing. Yeah, he thinks he has, but not according to what Hume is stating in his book, right?
In the same way that it's subject to gravity, right? Up, down, subject to gravity. As my ass is a little bit more every year. How often do you weigh yourself? Just by the by, I'm going to post this on X. I was just kind of curious about this. I used to weigh myself more.
Yeah, he desperately wants to avoid this, right? He wants to get to talk about all this everyday bullshit lingo, bullshit rambling. He sort of avoiding the hard questions, right? But it would serve him well to actually, as I say, bring up the quote, deal with the quote, and try to understand what Hume was saying. And then maybe internalize it a bit and say, am I doing something like that? Because anybody with half a brain would say, yeah, Hume is pointing to something that is actually fucking invalid. Just starting to say you ought or ought not out of the blue is not an argument. You are Mr. Not an argument. And you're trying to defend not an argument because you desperately need it in order to be one of those who want to boss people around, grasping to some subjective ought that arrives out of nowhere, or at least arrives out of nowhere from my point of view, right?
But then I realized it was just shallow vanity, and now I will weigh myself twice.
You can also put it this way. Let's say that these Bob and Jane are standing on that cliff edge, and then in front of me on that pathway is Stefan Molyneux, right? And he has his gunslinger gun on his side. And then I watch him, and then I see him walk over to these people, and then he pulls out a gun, right? And I think, holy shit, he's going to shoot them. I don't know what he's going to do. He's going to shoot these people. And I say, I'm going to take my gun. I'm going to shoot this guy who's going to shoot these people. I don't know what intentions this guy has. He looks like a fucking crazy person, right? This weird black cap he's wearing, and he's wearing some piggy makeup. This guy looks weird, right? I think I have to shoot this guy with the black cap with the Illuminati pyramid on, right? I have to shoot him because he's going to kill these people. I have to defend them. I'm going to shoot this guy. How does this work? How does this odd thing work, right?
Twice a year. I do the belt test. Do my belt loops still work? I just weigh myself twice a year. So the is-ought dichotomy, if, right? There has to be an if, right? You don't have to live in the same way that you are automatically subject to gravity. You don't have to live. If you want to live, you got to eat, you got to drink, you got to get rest, you got to take shelter, you got to keep your temperature.
What does that have to do with this situation? So you're trying to twist it into a UPB now, right? So this backup, which is, can I twist this around to UPB? Because then I can refute what you're saying by saying whatever you say is going to prove that I'm right. And then UPB, and UPB means that I can throw around ought terms as I see fit. Bullshit.
Well, these are the things. You got to breathe, right? If you want to live. Now, if you want to say something true about the world.
But I don't, but that's a hypothetical. If I want, but what if I don't want? So you're not creating an argument here. You're pretending to answer and you're not answering. Why does it take this long to get to a fucking answer? If you can't answer it, look up the quote. Maybe you have gotten it wrong. right? It's fucking ridiculously pathetic, this. It's a fucking loser mentality. Loser philosopher, right?
Then it has to correspond with the facts of the world, right? Here's another little, I was doing my test earlier. It's actually more blue, looks purple in the camera. Don't know why, I've given up on cameras. This is a...
No, but a fact is not a behavior then, is it? If this is a blue ball, okay, but if I force that blue ball down your throat, it's still a blue ball, right? So it's a fact. It's a fact that a blue ball. Yeah, but that's not the problem, is it? So it's this bridging of these events and bringing in the odds that is so fucking difficult. And it's difficult because it's impossible. You can't argue this way. There's no kind of thinking that all of a sudden gets you to boss people around. It's impossible because it will never follow. It's bad logic. It's not logic. It's not even just bad logic. It isn't logic. Maybe I should say.
I went through a whole AI thing setting up this camera a day or two ago. This purple ball, it's actually a blue ball, as I tell my wife. So it's a purple ball, but it's blue. So if I say this is a pair of glasses, arr.
So you only have one ball and it's blue or what? Maybe I should use... Oh my God. He's trying to explain something. He's trying to explain something like I'm a stupid idiot who needs some science because I'm just so fucking stupid, right? I need some blue balls in order to understand what this brainy guy is saying, right? Because he's so fucking brilliant. You know that. He is Mr. Brilliance. So.
Worst monocle ever, right? So. I couldn't figure out. This thing was just getting closer and closer. And then it hit me. Ow, shouldn't have done that hard. So.
What the?
How do you get the ought from the is? Well, the first one you get is you cannot say that oughts exist in the matter and energy of the universe. The atom doesn't care where it goes. The gravity is not conspiring to kill.
Okay, but according to that standard, I am made of matter and energy. So I haven't any ought either. When does that ought pop out of this thing then? Right? I'm just, when do we get to the point where we say, aha, look, there it is, the ought. Because that is basically what that invalid is-ought jump appeals to. It appeals to that the thing that comes before the ought has some ought imputed in it that the argumenter is sort of extracting from that scenario and saying, aha, there is some misalignment of oughts here and therefore you shouldn't. It appeals to that the first part of the is imbued with some kind of ought that is being extracted, and then the moralizing arrives by the ought and the ought not at the other half, right? That's the invalid step because there is no ought in the first bit. Then I can see what color does it have, what sound does it have, what taste does it have, what smell does it have, right? It has none of these. Is it an elephant? Is this similar to an elephant or bicycle or a slab of honey or whatever, right? Or a blue ball, a ball. It's not like that. So you can't experience it. So it can't be there in the is's. So it can't be in the oughts either. Because the invalid logical structure of that argument doesn't work. Because what you're implying is in the first part isn't there. Right?
Jay, it just is. So atoms and energy have no purpose, no goals, no morals, no values, no preferences, because they do not possess free will. There's no point lecturing a lion to become a vegetarian or a leftist to learn economics.
Okay, so all of a sudden, oh, free will popped up out of nowhere, right? Okay. He is trying desperately. He is on the burner here, or on the in the hot frying pan with this question. He's really struggling to argue rigidly for this, right? And he thinks that he sort of can casually on the fly in this kind of Friday Night Live kind of scenario can sort of just, because I'm special, right? Without even dragging in the quote and staying rigidly in accordance with Hume's quote. Why don't you do that for a change? Follow your own fucking odds, which says that you have to bring the quote of the philosopher in order to discuss it. Why don't you make a new video where you scrutinize and steel man and straw man or whatever you want with a quote, but use the fucking quote. Show Hume some fucking respect rather than all this bullshit, man, right?
Or a Marxist, to not be a murderous child hater. Because they're just predators, right?
What are you rambling on about?
I fully accept. There is no ought inscribed in the atoms of the universe. We do not live in a moral play created by God for our edification and elevation, to join the ranks of the angels by following his rules.
Okay, so the avenue of mysticism is gone. Okay, so you can't bring in an ought that way. At least we are on the same page there, right? Mysticism is just stating that you don't have, you can't accept that you can't find that ought out of the blue, right? So you have to invoke a God that gives it to you in this sort of even Kantian transcendental whatever bullshit, right? I'm not buying into that either. But that doesn't explain it. Now you ruled out one way that you can't get it. Fine. I'm on the same page. But you still wanted that ought, apparently. So I'm still waiting for that answer, right?
It's not what the universe is. That's not what the universe is about.
I might be reminded, if he said that Hume said that you ought not get an ought, haven't you refuted it then haven't you said, or at least implied, that there's some invalid argument in Hume, that Hume is kind of fucking it up? And weren't you saying that? But if you then keep arguing or so Hume is still somewhat valid, or what? How should I understand it? If you say that Hume should not tell you that you ought not get an ought, you're twisting the terms and you're misrepresenting him. Yes, but from your point of view, haven't you then refuted Hume then? Haven't you say it's an invalid argument? Done. Why you keep rambling now? Is it because you are still not fully refuted Hume by that first claim? It's just kind of confusing.
And there is no should, ought, must, moral, good, or evil written anywhere in the universe or in any of its properties or in any of its energies. Fully accept that. Because you can't prove it otherwise. I mean, there is no purpose to the atom. And we are all composed of atoms, and if none of our individual
there seemed to be a little hiccup in my recording here. So it looks like it's fine now, but I hope that it turns out okay. So I'm not going to run through it and check the synchronicity of lip sync and audio sync and whatever, right? So I hope it
atoms
works.
Have a purpose. How can we have a purpose? Blah, blah, blah. And now I've talked about this before. There's emergence properties called consciousness, right? None of our atoms are alive, yet we are alive. And so there's emergent properties.
What do you mean we are alive? So if you're all made of atoms and energy, matter and energy, what is the aliveness, right? What is that? You're not explaining much, right? In fact, it's worse than that. You're implying an explanation that you're not giving. You have been rambling for half an hour now without getting anywhere. It's pathetic. I mean, it's fucking ridiculous.
Properties from an aggregation of entities or objects. I mean, you get enough dense matter together, you get a super dense entity where a teacup of it would fit the whole Earth, and it's called a black hole. So something that is so dense with gravity that even light can't escape its gravity. Once you pass that event horizon, you go in and you create a perfect loop of sticky jam all over the black hole. It's not a hole. It's an absence of tracking because nothing, not even light, can escape its surface. It actually is the complete opposite of a hole.
Oh, shut the fuck up, you. So now you're trying to sound fancy by appealing to stories about black hole and your understanding of gravity and relativity and all sorts of shit. You're just pussyfooting around answering the question. Because I have to deduce from what this rambly thing here, right? That you have no clue what you're doing. You're misrepresenting Hume. You're creating some weird paradoxical argument and then that supposedly might refute Hume's the whole quote that he made that you're not referencing. And then you keep talking as if there's still something you need to tell me about this thing, this ought that can sort of apparently pop out of nowhere, right? At this point, I think that he might have a notion that he can't get to that ought. Right? Anybody in their right mind would not sit there and make this rambly thing where he sort of implies that he's going to hand me an ought and keep holding it back and talking about all sorts of irrelevant bullshit without presenting that argument, right? So he wants me to sort of drown in boredom and then maybe spring that, whatever that argument might be at the end sometime, or just pretend that there is an argument where there isn't actually an argument and then pretend that he's rambled his way to it. I mean, how do you expect people of any kind of just average intelligence to accept this bullshit? Do you really think that this is good thinking? Do you think that this is decent philosophy? I mean, what are your own standards for philosophizing? Is this what it is? Because it's pathetic. It's fucking atrocious. You're wasting people's time. You're wasting the airwaves on bullshit, right?
It is the most dense thing that can be conceived of outside of the aforementioned socialists. So, how do we get the ought from the is?
It's almost like if I keep asking the question, maybe I will come up with the answer, right? I'm just keep asking the question, how do I get it? 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 How do I get the ought? How do I get the ought? Let me talk about black holes, right? And blue balls.
Because if you say something that you say accurately describes reality, it has to accurately describe reality.
But I'm not. I'm talking about Hume's appeal to bad logic in moral statements. I mean, it's not that difficult. It's difficult because you don't understand it. And you think you have to bridge it in this sort of magical fashion because you're so fucking smart. And you have this merch, black cap that is selling merch, right? Because you're fucking special.
If you say, wouldn't it be cool if this was a flashlight? I'm saying, wouldn't it be cool if, not, it is a flashlight, right? If I say this is a flashlight, I'm making a claim about the...
But wouldn't it be cool if Bob was a George? It doesn't change anything, right? God, I mean, he's the lowest rung of pop philosophy, right? I mean, this is so atrociously bad that I'm lacking terms to describe how bad this guy is at philosophizing and presenting it. I should say maybe he has some brilliant philosophy, but when he starts to talk about it, it just crumbles, right?
The nature, purpose, and properties and capacities of a particular entity, which in this case is therefore wetting my lips, not shining my way forward in the dark. So when...
Yeah, so is he trying to say, if you say Bob is called George, right? You ought to call him Bob, right? If you say that Cliff is a soft ice, You're wrong. Yeah, but I'm not saying that.
When you say this is true in the world, the ought is you're making a claim that it is true, therefore it ought to be true.
What?
Right? If someone says, I want you to live while repeatedly stabbing you in the throat.
No, but get down to basics. Fuck the black holes, right? I don't mean that literally, but you're walking on the cliffs of Dover, right? And you see two people there, and you know they're called Bob and Jane, right? And you see Bob trying to push Jane. So where is the ought? Because that's what Hume is talking about. You're going there and you all of a sudden say, hey, I just got an ought here, right? You should or shouldn't. You ought or ought not. Where is it? And then point to it. Does it have a color, a sound, or a taste, and something like that? Does it have a qualia? Or is it some kind of cognition? Is it, hey, look at that ought there. That just popped an ought out of that situation, and you can cognize it over there. You can recognize it, right? Can you do that? Or does it have a sound or color and taste? If it doesn't have any of these, it doesn't follow from logic, right? You can't use logic if you can't experience it, right? So where the fuck is it? In that situation you brought to the fray, right?
Then that's not a true statement, right? I mean, don't give me the tracheotomy stuff. I mean, vengefully stabbing people in the throat. So how do you judge or adjudicate the is-ought dichotomy? By recognizing that statements to be valid and useful must be true. So
why? A statement must be true, but that's a proposition. You're saying you ought or ought not cannot be a proposition because you cannot propose something you can't experience. In my opinion, at least in my book, you can't, hey, that's an ought not. But how can I propose that if nobody can experience it? Is there somebody standing by and say, well, what color does it have? Nobody that doesn't have a color. But does it have a sound? No. Is it like a bicycle? No. It's not a concept. It's not an object. But what is it then? You're proposing something, but it's not there. How do you do that? No, you can only make a proposition about things that exist, like bicycles and pizzas and Bob and the cliff. That you can propose, and that can be true or false, depending on my judgment of the proposition. If you say that's a cliff and I experience a soft ice, I'm saying that's false. That's not a cliff. But if you say that's an ought not, I'm saying, what the hell are you talking about, right? So you can't get to these kinds of statements. You're just an idiot. You're stupid. Stop doing this shit, right? Or grow some fucking philosophical balls. Some blue balls, right? Or that one blue ball, make it red or whatever it needs to be, in order to grow some fucking hair on those balls and get to some good philosophy.
when it comes to morality, then we have universally preferable behavior.
Oh, no. Don't you fucking do that, right? We have, no. Hume has never heard of universally preferable behavior. You cannot bring in something that was created 300 years later by some stupid idiot, which is argued for by using 5 syllogisms that are so fucked up, it looks like a fucking piece of dog turds, right? You have to you have to look at Hume from Hume's standpoint, what he's trying to say from that point of view. You can't bring in your own bullshit philosophy to refute Hume. You have to understand what he's saying. You can agree with him or disagree with him, and I would like to hear why in both cases, depending on what the case is. But don't misrepresent him. Don't misquote him. Don't bring in your own bullshit philosophy. Don't do this. Quote him and say, I think he means this, and I think it goes right or wrong because of this and this and this. Fine.
And people can't argue against university preferable behavior without invoking university preferable behavior. If they say, Steph, you should not promote university preferable behavior because university preferable behavior is false, then they're saying it is universally preferable behavior to promote true theories and not promote false theories.
But a theory can be true or false. It's only propositions that can be true or false. I don't have a theory about that elephant. I'm proposing, potentially, I might not need to propose it, but if I'm proposing that's an elephant, that's not a theory. An elephant can be proposed. A theory can't be proposed because it's not an object, like an elephant. You don't understand what you're saying.
Right. So you can't argue against universally preferable behavior. It's like coming up to me and saying, Steph, But
I didn't ask about universal preferable behavior. I asked about David Hume's quote, right? So why are you talking about your own bullshit ethics? I'm not asking about that. I'm asking about Hume's quote, about how you get that ought from an is. I'm not saying that you can, but that's what Hume argued, that you should be careful, not argue this way because it's stupid.
I'm telling you, you don't exist and language has no meaning. I had this debate.
But did Hume say that? No, nothing like it. So you're just twisting you're creating sort of a red herring by sidetracking this discussion to ultimately it must be about my UPB, apparently. It's fucking atrocious, man, right?
Just this last week with a guy who gave me intellectual hives. You know, you just get this creepy sense that you're dealing with a crazy, manipulative person. That was my experience. It's out there for donors. It'll go out this weekend, I think. It's well worth listening to know when to bail. When to fold them.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, you need to bail on this man who asked question about your UPB. If you have an UPB ethics and somebody asks questions, you need to get rid of them because they're asking questions. They don't trust that you must be right because you are Mr. Egghead philosopher. And I wrote it. So it must be right because I'm special, right?
So you can't argue against university preferable behavior. You can't argue against property right.
No, but I can still, be shoved off a cliff by Bob, right? If I argue or not argue, well, what does that matter if Bob shoved me off a cliff? And there's no ought, or there is an ought, or what is not settled yet. You're just rambling.
It's because property says, I own myself, you own yourself, and we own the effects of our actions. So if I'm arguing for property and you argue back and you say, Steph, your argument for property is wrong. It's like you just affirm.
But what are you... Why don't you get back to this is about Hume. This is not about your stupid philosophy. It's about Hume's philosophy and his arguments. All right?
My entire argument for property. So you just got to freeze frame debates and say, okay, what are all the implicit premises embedded in having a debate? Right?
Yeah, but basically that's what Hume is doing. He's freeze framing these stupid debates and saying, there's a problem there. You're actually pointing to something that is interesting now, that Hume is actually doing what you're saying you should do. You should point to these stupid arguments and say, there's a problem there. There's some inherent problem in your argument. You're just jumping into odds without any fucking justification, as if it just follows from what you just say prior to that ought. That doesn't follow. That's what Hume is doing. You should be able to identify that now.
If somebody says to me, Steph, your argument that we own the effects of our actions is wrong, I say,
but your argument is, I can get an ought from an is. Hume is saying, I want you to justify that. You haven't justified that jump yet. You are throwing a lot of lingo out in the ether, but there's no justification for an ought from an is, right? Are you trying to argue that you can do it, or are you agreeing with Hume, or what are you doing? You're basically trying to confuse everybody. You're creating a smokescreen of words in order to cloak in order to pacify and confuse so people can't see that you actually don't know what you're talking about. Or that's your hope and concern.
Whose argument is that? Oh, right, my argument. Therefore, I own the effects of my actions. My argument, right? You can't argue against UPB. You can't argue against property rights without affirming UPB and affirming property rights.
But the question is not your UPB. That's another story. Would you mind sticking to what Hume said? Right? Would you mind doing that? Because that's what I'm referring to.
Do it. And I know this takes a little while to massage into the brain, because we're looking for some external thing with no reference to what we're doing. This is an example I made like 20 years ago. If I write you a letter saying letters never get delivered to the right person,
why are you rambling on about this? This has nothing to do with what Hume is arguing. You might find something else somewhere where Hume talks about this, but that's not the question I'm dealing with, trying to point to. It's you're an idiot. You're treating me like I'm a fucking stupid idiot, right?
Just detonated my own argument.
Maybe it takes a really stupid idiot to treat other people like stupid idiots, right? It takes one to do it.
Because obviously if I believe that letters never get addressed to the right person, I wouldn't write you a letter. But the fact that I've written you a letter on the assumption it gets delivered to the right person, and the content of the letter is that letters never get delivered to the right person, then the form of the argument contradicts the content of the argument. And I meant this 15 years ago. I said this is one of my big contributions to philosophy. It's saying, forget about the content of the argument. Everyone wants to just start engaging with the content.
No, but at the end of the day, you can juggle these moral statements and ethics and so on. You can juggle it all you want. At some point, you have a real situation where you have to do something, you have to act or adjust your actions in some. I'm not saying you have to, but if you want to be moral, then you have to apply some kind of principle or whatever you want to call it to a particular situation. Maybe you have to do it in perpetuity, it depends on maybe what you end up with as a moral principle. But you can't say, look, there's a contradiction there. I mean, if you're not even saying anything. You're observing Bob and Jane, and you see Bob push Jane over the cliff. Where is the contradictory statement? Where this ought pops out, apparently. I mean, I haven't heard the argument yet for where that ought comes from, right? It's inconceivable to me, just like Hume says. He's just talking about some contradictory statement. If you make the statement, it's contradictory. Yeah, but I didn't make any statement. I just saw you running with a gun towards these two people at the cliff edge. And you're running with a gun that looks threatening. So I think I'm going to take my gun and shoot you so you don't kill these two persons. There's no argument anywhere. There's just observations and actions, right? So as long as nobody makes a contradictory statement or any statement about oughts or anything, how does your philosophy work then? Because it sounds like you need to make a statement in order to justify the ought. You have to make a statement, then you can say that's contradictory, and therefore you cannot reject oughts, and therefore I can make an ought. That's what it sounds to me like, that you cannot make a statement that says you ought not make an ought, and therefore I can make an ought.
Of the argument, that's jumping into philosophy midstream, as Ayn Rand used to say. Forget the content of the argument. Look at all of the premises embedded in the form of the argument.
Yeah. For instance, when you said, and he should be punished. Okay. You observe something, and all of a sudden, that punishment arrives out of nowhere. Why? I'm observing your argument, right? So where does that punishment, and who should, are you going to punish that guy? Are you going to throw him off the cliff or what? What are you going to, are you going to shoot him? Are you going to box with him? What are you going to do? I mean, how does it follow? He didn't make any statement as far as I recollect, right? He didn't make you can't get an order or anything like that, and he didn't make an argument or anything. He didn't talk about black holes or blue balls or anything. He just pushed a woman over the cliff. How does that order arrive out of that scenario? You just claim that it did by saying he should be punished. That's a way of saying ought, just covered up in some language, right? So you're implying that it should be argued well, while you're just throwing around stupid arguments left and right without any justification that is basically implying the thing that Hume is pointing out that you can't do. That's the level of stupid that you're in.
But he argues with me and says, I don't believe that you exist. Well, then, if you don't believe that I exist, why would you argue with me? If somebody says to me, the senses are invalid, then I would say, why are you using...
Yeah, but what does it have anything? There's no bearing on Hume. If somebody said something I don't like and that is contradictory, it's stupid. Yeah, sure. But that's not what Hume says, right? So stick to Hume, would you? Right? Because that's what I'm trying to get to.
The senses.
It should be obvious. But because this guy doesn't know what he's doing, he has to wrap you in all this stupid rambling, right?
To transmit the idea that the senses are invalid because you're requiring my ears to work or my eyes to read. And therefore, you are relying upon the validity of the senses to argue that the senses are invalid. Right? Somebody can't say language is meaningless.
So he just keeps rambling, right? We're never going to get the answer, right? Because if he hasn't dished out the answer now, after I think more than half an hour of just rambly shit, you're never going to get it. And if you get something, it's probably not valid because you're trying to push it until you're sort of almost disconnected from this and just hearing with half an ear, right? And then he said, and then the answer is this. Okay, next caller. Right?
Language is meaningless, is taking the written and verbal form, I guess it could be signed form as well, braille form, forms of human communication, and saying that all forms of communication cannot convey any meaning. And the meaning that I'm using human communication to convey is that human communication cannot convey any meaning. That's a contradictory statement. And you don't argue the content, right? You argue the form first. Because people will always...
Isn't that what Hume is saying? He's basically saying, in another slightly different terms, but that look at what they're doing. You're completely on the same page with this particular angle with Hume. That's exactly what Hume is doing. He's saying, but look at what they're doing. Don't fall for this sophist trick that you can just say, I've experienced this, therefore you shouldn't. It doesn't follow. It's bad logic. What? It's bad logic. That's what Hume is pointing out. He's actually doing exactly what you are pointing to, which I agree with. Yeah, look at what they're saying. If there's some bad structure of argument, of course you should take that into consideration.
Use the form. It's like counterfeit currency, right? People will try to use the form of the argument to dismantle the possibility of argumentation. But if you're going to tell me, Steph, UPP is wrong and you should stop promoting it, then you've just affirmed UPP. Now, you haven't affirmed...
No, but I have pointed out that his actual content of his so-called UPP is atrociously stupid. In a recent video where I point to his UPP as, you know, his so-called proofs are just ridiculous, right? It's ramblings of somebody who has no fucking idea what he's doing, right?
All of my moral arguments, but the moment someone corrects you, they're saying it's infinitely...
No, but if you can just say, well, if you argue against me, I'm right. You just prove me. Well, why do you need to write a book on 250 pages if you can just say, I made a statement, and you can't, but if you make a contrary statement, you're proving my statement. So that's all you need to do. It's just a little card that says that. You don't need to write a book. So why do you ramble on in the 250 pages of a book in order to just say the same thing, which is, if you argue against me, I'm right?
Preferable to say things that are true, valid, accurate, logical, whatever you say. It's infinitely preferable to say true things than to say false things. So that's you.
Why is it that? I don't see an argument there. So now you're creating a similar bad argument, like Hume points out, with the is-ought thing. So it's infinitely better to be true than false. What is a statement perforce either or? I don't think that's necessarily the case. It can be true to me and false to you. If I say that's an elephant and I experience elephant, it's true to me. That's that proposition. But if you don't experience an elephant in that direction, it's false to you. So it can be true or false at the same time, depending on the view and the experience.
PB. Truth is preferable to error. The moment someone corrects you, the moment someone debates you, the moment someone uses language.
Like you do now, right?
Right, because if they say language is a terrible form of communication, I'd say...
Yeah, but who says that? Who cares about that? Because that's not what we're dealing with. We are dealing with Hume here, right?
Okay, then give me your argument mentally. Give me your argument without using language, right? Thank you, John. I appreciate the tip. I really do. I really do. Just like Socrates himself working for tips, coffee and lunch. Well, I guess there was no coffee back in ancient Greece, was there? South America, Africa. I know Ethiopian coffee can be pretty good. A little dry. Anyway, so...
What?
Yeah, so that's how you get out of it. Now, once you say that the ought is in the relationship between the mind and reality, if you want to say things that are true, then they have to correspond with reason and evidence. That's the ought. The ought is statements claimed to be true or to be true.
No. Don't straw man what Hume is saying. He is not saying that. He is saying that people argue in a fashion where they start by describing things and then suddenly switch to moralizing. That's what he points out. He's pointing out a problem in the statement, just like you said that you should. He's not saying that you should make honest statements, honest propositions. That's not what Hume is saying. You're twisting it around in order to get it your way, right? In order to sidetrack it into some kind of UPB freak scenario. It's bullshit. You're a disgrace. You're not showing Hume the respect that he deserves.
True. But you can claim things to be true and have to be false. Sure, absolutely. But then everybody knows that they're false, right?
How? Just to take that on for size. If you say that's an elephant, and I look at that, and what I see is a soft ice, I have to say that proposition is false, right? But you say it's true, it's an elephant. I say it's false. Who's right? From my point of view, I can't see if you experience elephant because I'm not having your experiences. What is known as the problem of other minds, right? I can't know if your proposition is in alignment with your experiences. I can see if that proposition is in alignment with my experience. And if you say that's an elephant and I experience a soft ice, that proposition is false to me, right? You might be lying, right? When I make that statement that is false to me, I might be lying for all you know from your point of view. So we can never get to a settlement unless you want to think that you're the master of reality. And if you experience a fucking elephant, there is an elephant. Anything else be damned, right? So you are the master of the universe who knows everything.
So that's better. That's an improvement. So the is-ought is in the relationship between the mind and things in reality. Universally preferable.
No. No, it isn't. You're an idiot. You're a fucking stupid, rambling idiot, right? Why don't you take the fucking quote and analyze it, right? Show Hume some fucking respect, man, right? He was a brilliant man. And he is discarded and ridiculed exactly because people can't get around his fucking observations and criticism of all sorts of shit that people do and take for granted that they cannot allow to be taken for granted. He is the best fucking philosopher in the history of philosophy, in my opinion, maybe myself excluded. No, I don't want to bash my own drum, right? But I think that what my approach is actually a similar kind of approach that Hume took, but taking to the next level, at least an attempt at it, right? So please go and look at my philosophy, my series called My Philosophy, which is sort of half a year old or so you can easily find it in my feed. And I deal with these questions and I present how I approach it. It's very, very simple. It's not like this rambly bullshit by this idiot, right? It's straight to the point and easy to understand. No big flowery language or anything or pointing fingers. No, it's very simple. You just have to accept the obvious, right?
Preferable behavior can never be overturned. Because any attempt to overturn universally preferable behavior requires an acceptance of universally preferable behavior. You cannot argue against universally preferable behavior.
So I was saying, I came up with another philosophy. And because if you try to argue against it, you can't argue against it. So it doesn't matter about his sort, because I have something that's just better. So it doesn't matter. Because he's trying to say something, he's just going to prove me right. So it doesn't matter what he's saying. Is that what you're saying? I mean, okay,
and so then
right.
Universally preferable behavior exists. We just have to define it. It exists and it's valid because you can't argue against it. Now, some people can think...
To define it? What do you mean by define it? Isn't that what you're doing in your book? And proving it? Hang on, dude. What am I missing here? Have you just lost touch with everything? I mean, what the fuck is going on here?
That's wrong. But even if they say that's wrong in their mind, they're still violating UPB. So, they're still affirming UPB. So then all we have to do, since the ought exists in the relationship between things in the mind and things in the world, and universally preferable behavior is a valid concept, all we have to do is define what universally preferable behavior is. That's all.
But why do we have to do that? Isn't that your job? You're the fucking brilliant philosopher. Figure it out. Stupid idiot. I mean, you've been rambling for 20 years and now you say we have to figure it out? No. You have to figure out your philosophy. It's not my job to figure out what problems you can't solve. What are you doing? I mean, it's beyond stupid, this. Yeah, my God, what a fucking idiot, man, right?
It's real. It's valid. We just have to define what it is.
It's real?
And then that's the 4 major proofs against rape, theft, assault, and murder that are in the book. So I hope that helps. Thank you so much for a great question. All right.
What?
Let us.
So you're just going to leave it there and not give me the fucking answer. What a fucking load of bullshit, man, right? For your bowing down, putting on your cap, looking down at your feet in disgrace, right? Blah.
Get to.
It's fucking atrocious. It's disrespectful to Hume, in my honest opinion. You're not even going to pull up the quote, right? and see what did he actually say. Let me reflect about what he said, right? No. Your fancy ideas of how you should bring the philosopher's quote from the book to the discourse and so on is nowhere to be seen, right? You have all sorts of fancy ideas about how everybody else should do it, but you're special, right? You're the selected one who can do whatever he wants because he's special. And he wrote a book 20 years ago and it's perfect, right?
Hey, call there. Also, call.freedomain.com. Call.freedomain.com. I know some people have been missing calls lately. I've set up something where you get text reminders because, different time zones and so on, people get confused. So, yes, Richard, you had... I'm sorry, we didn't get you last time. I'm all ears. What's up?
Okay, so he's just going to leave it there, right? He's just pretending that there wasn't actually any questions there. He's completely misguided about what Hume tried to say. He is rambling on about basically anything but what Hume was trying to say, and then misrepresenting it, and then using some kind of, I have a UPB, and therefore I don't need to answer it kind of thing. And also implying that Hume is saying that you ought not talk about odds, and therefore he is creating a paradox, and therefore I can use odds. What the fuck is that, man, right? Enough said. We are closing in on the 3-hour mark, right? I hope you got the gist of this, and I hope you will spend some time on more on understanding Hume than trying to understand this guy, because he's fucking, he is lost behind the wagon, right? He's falling on the wayside, rolling in the hay, right? Roll in the hay, right? So there's nothing much to get from this guy. He's a fucking idiot, right? Okay, so apparently I spend a lot of time on idiots, right? But he deserves to be scrutinized and pointed out how bad he is. So in order to make people wake up and see this guy doesn't know what he's doing, at least when it comes to rigid philosophy. He might be on track with something about peaceful parenting. Fine, go do that. In fact, I would prefer you stayed with that rather than creating this bullshit philosophy. But I guess you need to have some kind of bullshit philosophy, or at least something that pretends to be philosophy, in order to justify all your moralization. Because if you can't get that ought, you have nothing. You have to shut the fuck up about, that happened, that's just what happens. Matter and energy, right? Okay. Please share, like, and subscribe. Give me a comment. What do you think about this? And consider a donation, QR codes here in the screen, and click with your phone, and otherwise in the bio, and contact me if you have other ways you want to chip in, right? So beyond that, have a nice day. See you in the next one.